Oh, let's watch this. Damn, I wanted to watch this with you. This is actually so relevant. Let's watch this. Talking about Russia. Russia, the phony Russia hoax.
Despite more than 3 years of war, huge military expenses and waves of sanctions, Russia's economy appears to be thriving.
Хотите батоны, а хотите дроны.
But as President Trump threatens harsh economic sanctions,
We just don't see any progress being made.
and cracks begin to show, how long can it last?
War has been a huge stimulus for the Russian economy, but they can't continue doing this forever. The reality.
This is a recently uploaded video, but it feels incredibly dated. This is the conversation from like 3-4 months ago. Honestly, earlier. Like when I talked about this on stream, it's because I was reading it from other papers. Wall Street Journal's behind.
They're likely to run out of money.
Since launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Moscow has ramped up its military spending.
If we go back to 2022, Russian defense spending was about $50 billion a year. They are now spending close to $150 billion a year on their military.
As the war continues, President Trump has vowed to turn up the economic pressure on Moscow, threatening tariffs and secondary sanctions if a ceasefire isn't reached.
Russia could be so rich right now. Instead, they spend all their money on war. They spend everything on war and killing people, and it doesn't make sense.
But Russia has
Tell 'em,
shown
Trump.
it can adapt to economic pressure. Since launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it has become the most sanctioned major economy on the planet.
We had statements from Western leaders like turning the ruble to rubble. This was intended to bring the Russian economy to a complete halt. It was meant to make the continuation of the war.
I just want to say, maybe they're going to say this, but I just want to say, sanctions on materials, raw materials, oil, gas, all that stuff doesn't really fucking work. People buy every fucking barrel that comes out of the ground. You just sell it to someone else. Like, someone will buy it. Someone always buys it. I want to show you a recent example that I think is very relevant. This is more about tariffs, but it's the same idea, bro. It's like, this is our trade deficit with China. I'm trying to find it. Okay, I don't have it, but I have the counterbalance. Anyway, what I'm saying is the amount of goods that China is shipping us has decreased dramatically ever since the tariffs. Our trade balance is way closer because we're not buying as much stuff from China. So you might think, wow, that's huge progress. But it turns out as that's happening, the exact same amount that's lost from the China thing has spontaneously appeared in Mexico and Vietnam. The trade deficit that we narrowed the gap with China has expanded with Mexico and Vietnam. And it's because all the goods just go to one of these two places and then go to America. It's this crazy coincidence. We haven't changed it. We've just shifted it around. And that's the same thing with these so-called sanctions on Russian oil. Like, the oil is too big of a global commodity. You can't keep it down. So anyway, the reason Russia's economy is hurting more than usual lately is probably because oil prices have been down, much less than the sanctions biting.
Despite this, in 2024, Russia's economy outpaced the growth of most advanced nations, including the US.
There was a deep economic contraction in 2022. It was 2% of GDP. And by the way, that's
How should we economically hurt Russia then? The honest answer, if you wanted to economically hurt Russia, is to do whatever it takes to get the oil price down. And Biden sort of did this, by the way, to his credit. He released the United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve to keep oil prices low until oil prices were actually low. You can actually do that. That actually is effective. But drill, baby, drill is correct. But more than just in America, what you really need is like to get all producers turning it on. Like, you need to parlay with OPEC to reduce production cuts and flood the market. All that stuff combined would can deeply hurt Iran and Russia if that was your goal. Sanctioning doesn't really work.
But what's interesting is that they bounce back very, very quickly.
Analysts say Russia was able to avoid the impact of current sanctions by reorienting its economy.
The EU was lost as an export market almost entirely. The two big export markets for Russia are China and India. Effectively, they have reorientated towards the export of fuels to China and India. Because that reorientation was possible, that's one of the reasons the sanctions haven't really bit in as much as we might expect.
In addition, Moscow turned its economic focus on supplying its war effort in Ukraine, with even the most unlikely companies focusing on war. Russian state TV broadcast a segment about a bread factory that swapped dough for drones.
Они еще пахнут свежим хлебом.
But I also want to say, like, even the European sanctions, like, Europe stopped selling certain cars to Russia, jewelry to Russia, high-end things, luxury items to Russia, okay? As part of the sanctions. But the problem is, surprisingly, overnight, Kazakhstan started buying a ton of Mercedes. You know, like they bought it and then it just traffics across the border. Like the market for the thing is still there.
They're spending a tremendous amount of money on armaments. So there's been the expansion of the military-industrial complex. That's hoovered up labour. So we've seen unemployment in Russia actually fall to a 30-year low.
Russia has largely been able to sustain these high levels of spending thanks to its oil and gas sector, which makes up around 20% of Russia's GDP. But analysts warn this can't last forever.
By rights, Russia should have a budget surplus at the moment. That surplus should be going into their national wealth fund. What we've seen is that they're spending far more than they're bringing in. And the way that...
I feel like I covered this a month ago. Like every stat in this entire thing. I'm not tooting my own horn. I read it somewhere else, but like I covered everything. This exact thing. Like every line that he's saying, I feel like I already said, including the one about their national wealth fund, including the fact they're out of gold in their central bank and out of their. I straight up think
they are
I've heard this already.
Is by running down their remaining reserves. So at the present burn rate, we see them running out at about 2030.
With President Trump threatening to come down hard on Russia, concerns are growing that this could have far-reaching consequences.
There's been a suggestion of 100% secondary tariffs. So those who buy from Russia, say buy Russian oil, would be hit with tariffs entering the US market. China and India are the main buyers of Russian oil. They collectively account for almost half of Russian exports. Let's imagine if they were to stop buying Russian oil completely. That would be catastrophic for the Russian economy. Russia looks to oil and gas receipts for anything from a third to half of its annual budget. More broadly, this would create a tremendous oil shock in the world. So the price of oil would rocket. It could be recession.
Yeah, but the second the price of oil rockets, all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, the Russian oil is relabeled as some other Kazakhstani oil or something. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's all so foolish, dude. It all doesn't work. You just have to make what they're selling cheaper. You flood the market with it. You don't try to restrict it.
Trump's threats also come as cracks in Russia's economy are beginning to show.
Now, inflation has been high, but wage inflation has been even higher. So, if anything, the standard of living of Russians has improved.
Should go to war
the
more
problem,
often.
of course, is that this is not sustainable. That eventually Russia is going to hit the fiscal buffers.
Despite the economic risks, experts believe Russian President Vladimir Putin remains committed to his goal of seizing as much of Ukraine as possible, and that Russia will try to sustain its military economy for years to come as it eyes conflicts beyond Ukraine.
If you look at Russian defence expenditure, 2025 is likely to be a peak, but that's on the basis that at some point there will be a ceasefire. At that point, we'd expect defence spending to moderate. But we don't see spending going back to the 2022 or 2021 level. It's going to stay elevated. Russia would say that it still faces threats. It would argue that NATO is a threat, so they need to be prepared. I think they do understand that at some
Watch out for
point
me,
this
Putin.
war will
Watch
have
the
to
f*** out.
end. But of course, politically,
The real threat is the streamers, okay? Because we have the real fucking power to take down fucking Putin's Russia. One-man army, baby. This video is Big Nothing Burger. I actually do agree with you. I think that video was news that was 3 months out of date, delivered with stock footage. I actually was not impressed with that video, straight up. I legitimately feel like the person who worked on that read the same articles I read 3 months ago. And then wrote that script. That was actually slop.